The rain had been falling since dawn, and Simone Williams was already late for her shift at Mercy General Hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. She'd overslept, her alarm buried somewhere in her scattered apartment while she lay awake until 3 in the morning scrolling through rejection emails from graduate programs. Nursing school had turned her down 3 times. 3 times. Each email felt like a personal failure, a confirmation of something she'd suspected her whole life. She wasn't enough. The morning was October gray, the kind that makes the world feel smaller and heavier. Simone power walked through the downtown district near 5th and Madison, her scrubs stuffed into a canvas tote bag, her street clothes already damp from the drizzle. She should have taken the bus. But the bus was slow, and she was already running 40 minutes behind, and her supervisor, Patricia, had a way of looking at you when you were late that made you feel like you'd personally disappointed the entire medical establishment. She cut through Riverside Plaza, a sprawling courtyard that connected the hospital complex to the downtown shopping district. The plaza was designed to feel European, stone walkways, expensive fountains, wrought iron benches scattered throughout like decorative chess pieces. It was beautiful in a sterile way, the kind of beautiful that made people feel rushed just by existing in it. That's when she heard the sound. Not a scream exactly, but something worse. The sound of surprise, the sharp intake of breath that comes when your body betrays you. It was the sound of falling without time to prepare. Simone's head snapped up. An elderly man, white-haired and thin-shouldered, was stumbling on the wet stone near the fountain, his cane, a real wood one, not the modern kind, clattering against the pavement. His arms windmilled. His face registered pure panic, the primal terror of gravity winning. Without thinking, Simone dropped her tote bag and lunged. Her hand caught his wrist just as his knees buckled. For a moment, the entire physics of his body hung suspended between falling and being saved. She could feel how light he was, how fragile, like holding a bird made of paper and bones. She pulled hard, using her legs to anchor herself against the wet stone, and managed to stabilize him enough that he landed on one knee instead of face-planting onto the plaza. I've got you, Simone said, her voice shaking. She was still holding his arm, felt the tremor in his muscles, the rapid fire of his heartbeat in the thin skin of his wrist. Don't move too fast. Are you hurt? Can you feel your legs? The man looked up at her, his eyes watery blue and confused. He blinked several times, as if waking from a dream. What happened? His voice was thin, reedy. I slipped, did I fall? You almost did, but you're okay now. I've got you. Simone was already in professional mode, her training kicking in despite her racing pulse. She did a quick visual assessment. No obvious bleeding, no twisted angles suggesting breaks, though at his age, internal injuries were always a risk. My name is Simone. I'm a nursing assistant at Mercy General. We're right near the hospital. Let's get you up slowly. Can you do that? She helped him to his feet, keeping a firm hand on his back and forearm. His name was Richard, he told her, 83 years old. He lived about 6 blocks from here, visited the plaza every morning when the weather was decent because his cardiologist said he needed to walk. His daughter didn't like him going alone, but he was independent, didn't want to be a burden. I'm glad I was here, Simone said, guiding him toward a bench. Do you want me to call someone, your daughter? No, Richard said, though he sat down heavily, breathing hard. Don't want to worry her, I'm fine, just clumsy old bones. But Simone could see the fear still etched into the corners of his eyes. She waited with him for 10 minutes, asked him more questions to assess for concussion. What was his name? What day was it? Where did he live? She felt his hands, checking for signs of arthritis or tremors. Professional assessment, professional distance, professional concern. When he seemed more stable, more present, she helped him stand. You should really get checked out, Simone said. The hospital is right there, we can. No hospitals, Richard said firmly but not unkindly. I hate hospitals. Nothing wrong with me that a little rest won't fix. You've been kind, more than kind, but I don't want to be a bother. Simone knew she should push harder, knew that elderly falls were nothing to take lightly. But she also knew something else. She was 40 minutes late to work, and Patricia's patience was a finite resource, and this man had made his choice. All right, she said, but promise me you'll call if you feel dizzy or nauseous or if anything hurts that shouldn't. Can you do that? Richard nodded, squeezed her hand. His fingers were paper-thin, spotted with age. You're a good person, he said. A truly good person. The world needs more like you. It wasn't much, just something a scared old man said to a stranger who'd helped him. But Simone felt it land somewhere deep. in the place where all those rejection emails had been piling up. Maybe she wasn't a failure. Maybe she was exactly where she needed to be. She picked up her dropped tote bag, smoothed her hair, and hurried toward the hospital entrance, already mentally drafting an excuse for Patricia. A medical emergency, she could say. Someone needed help. It wasn't technically a lie. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire interaction. The video went live at 2:47 p.m., posted to a private Facebook group called Riverside District Watch by a woman named Karen Hendricks. Karen was the type of woman who had opinions about everything: the quality of the coffee at Starbucks, the moral decline of young people, the dangers of unlocked car doors in downtown areas. She was 61, had raised 3 children who barely called her anymore, and had filled the void of empty nest syndrome with hypervigilance about her neighborhood. The video was 30 seconds long and had been shot from a bench across the plaza. It showed Simone grabbing Richard's arm, but the angle, combined with the rain and Karen's shaking hands, made it look sinister. The quality was poor, pixelated, a storm of gray and movement that could have been anything. Karen's caption was worse than the video itself. "Warning, be careful in Riverside Plaza. Just watched a young woman corner an elderly man near the fountain. Looked like she was trying to prevent him from leaving. I couldn't get the full context, but something felt off. Is anyone else seeing this? Where are the security guards?" 3 comments within the first minute. 4 within 5. By 3:15 p.m., the post had 47 comments and had been shared 16 times. By 4:00 p.m., it was 300 comments, 50 shares, and someone had cross-posted it to Reddit. By 5:00 p.m., a local news outlet had picked it up. "Elderly man approaches by unidentified woman in downtown plaza. Police investigate." The headline didn't use the word attacked, but it was right there in the subtext. It was in the way the story was framed: the concern for the elderly, the vague threat from an unidentified woman, the implication of predatory behavior. It was in the comments, which spiraled instantly. "That's why I don't go downtown anymore. They probably saw he had a cane and thought he had a wallet. This is assault. Why didn't anyone help him? Shameful, absolutely shameful." The internet had written its own story, and reality was no longer invited to the conversation. Simone found out through her coworker, Destiny. They were in the break room on the 3rd floor, Simone finally on her lunch break after a brutal morning of bed changes and patient transport. Destiny, who worked in admissions, had that look on her face, the look of someone about to deliver bad news. "Don't take this the wrong way," Destiny said, sliding her phone across the table. "But you need to see this." Simone watched the video 3 times, her stomach dropping further with each viewing. She watched her own face, young, black, terrified for an old man she'd just met, transform into something else entirely under the weight of the internet's interpretation. She read the headline. She read the comments. "That's her, that has to be her. The hospital logo is visible in the background. She probably works there. I would recognize her if I saw her again. We should find her." "This is crazy," Simone whispered. "I helped him, he fell, and I helped him. This is insane." "I know," Destiny said quietly, "but the internet doesn't care about context, you know that." What Simone knew was this: she had done something good. She had acted without thinking, without calculating risk or benefit, and she had done something good. And the universe had responded by turning it into evidence of her guilt. Her phone buzzed, then again, then again. Texts from numbers she didn't recognize, voicemails from reporters, a message from the hospital HR department asking her to come in for a meeting the next morning. A message from her mother that just said, "Call me now." Simone's hand shook as she called home. Her mother, Gloria, answered before the first ring finished. Gloria Williams was a woman who had raised a daughter alone, who had worked as a teacher's aide for 28 years, and knew the value of a good reputation, who had watched her daughter's face on the internet being scrutinized by strangers. "Baby, what did you do?" Gloria asked, and Simone heard the fear underneath the question. Not fear that her daughter was guilty, fear that her daughter was unsafe. "Nothing, Mom. I helped someone. An old man fell and I helped him up. That's all." There was a pause. Then, "Simone, there's a video. The video makes it look." "I know what it looks like," Simone said, "but that's not what happened." "That's not what matters," Gloria said, and those words, spoken by the person who had taught Simone to value kindness, landed like a punch. "What matters is what people believe happened. We need to be careful here. We need to talk to someone." That night, Simone sat in her small, one-bedroom apartment and watched her own face be dissected by strangers on the internet. She created a Google alert for her name and immediately regretted it. The articles kept coming, each one confident in its speculation, each one presenting a narrative that had nothing to do with her. Local woman DETAINED4 questioning in plaza incident. She hadn't been detained, only asked to come in for questioning. Hospital workers past raises questions. Her past consisted of 2 parking tickets and a misdemeanor from when she was 19, a stupid shoplifting incident that had been expunged from her record, but the internet had resurrected it anyway. Community concerned about safety. The community had not, in fact, looked at the actual facts, but that didn't stop them from being concerned. By midnight, Simone had 847 new followers on her Instagram, but they weren't there to support her. They were there to watch, to wait, to see if she would confirm their suspicions. She turned off her phone and lay in the dark, listening to the rain that had continued all day, and she wondered how a good deed could become evidence of something terrible. Richard Sutton's daughter, Catherine, found out about the video through a friend. Catherine was 54, successful in pharmaceutical sales, and she had spent the last 15 years trying to keep her aging father from being a burden on her life, while simultaneously feeling guilty for trying to do so. She called him immediately after watching the video. "Dad, are you okay? Were you attacked?" Richard, who had been peacefully watching the news, was confused by the urgency in his daughter's voice. "No, sweetheart, I'm fine. I fell at the plaza this morning and a lovely young woman helped me up. Nothing happened. I told you not to worry about." "There's a video of you," Catherine interrupted. "It's all over the internet. It looks like she was attacking you." Richard was silent for a moment. Then, "Well, she wasn't. She was helping me. I nearly fell on my face and she caught me. I don't know what else to tell you." But Catherine had already hung up and was pulling up the video again. She watched it with the eyes of a daughter who had spent years worrying about her father's independence, his stubbornness, his refusal to accept help. She watched it and saw danger, saw vulnerability, saw her father being exploited. She didn't watch it with the eyes of truth. She watched it with the eyes of fear. Catherine arrived at her father's apartment at 6:00 p.m. that evening, letting herself in with her own key. Richard was sitting in his favorite chair, a leather recliner facing the window where he liked to watch the birds at the feeder. "We need to talk about what happened," Catherine said, sitting across from him. "The woman who helped me isn't a criminal if that's what you're worried about," Richard said calmly. "She was kind. She checked on me, made sure I was all right. Then she went on with her day. There's no story here." "Then why is everyone saying there is?" Catherine's voice rose. "Why would people post a video if nothing happened?" "Because people like drama," Richard said simply. "Because the truth is boring, and a young black woman helping an old white man doesn't fit anyone's narrative." Catherine flinched at the race reference. It was something her father had started doing more frequently in recent years, acknowledging the reality of race in America in ways that made Catherine uncomfortable. She preferred not to think about such things, preferred the narrative where everyone was equal and racism was a thing of the past. "Dad, your safety is what matters," Catherine said. "We need to be careful. We need to protect ourselves." "From what?" Richard asked. "From gratitude, from a good deed. From lawsuits, from false accusations." Richard looked at his daughter for a long moment. Catherine saw him register something, disappointment, maybe, or sadness. "I'm not going to accuse an innocent woman of anything," he said quietly. "Even if it would protect us?" Catherine asked, and she heard how terrible the question sounded even as she asked it. She heard how it revealed something in herself that she hadn't wanted to see. Richard didn't answer. He turned back to the window, where the light was fading and the birds were disappearing for the night. Catherine stayed with her father that evening, and they had a careful, measured conversation about what would happen next. There would likely be police questions. There would likely be media interest. They needed to prepare a statement, something that was honest but also protective. Something that acknowledged that nothing bad had happened while also not throwing the young woman into the full weight of public judgment. But Catherine had already set something in motion that she couldn't stop. She had called her lawyer. The lawyer's name was Bradford Walsh, and he was very good at his job. His job was to protect people like Catherine from liability, from risk, from the kind of unpredictable human situations that made wealthy people nervous. Bradford looked at the video and saw opportunity. "We need to be proactive here," he said in his conference room, leather chair creaking as he leaned back. "The narrative is already forming. We either shape it or we let it shape us." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "I mean we don't know what this woman's intentions were. The video is ambiguous. Police will investigate. But in the meantime, we can protect your father by establishing that he's a concerned victim of unclear circumstances. We don't accuse her of anything, but we acknowledge that we're worried, that he's frightened, that we want answers." "But he's not frightened," Catherine said. "He's told me multiple times that she helped him." Bradford smiled the smile of a man who has heard inconvenient truths before and knows how to dispose of them. "Trauma affects memory," he said. "Elderly people especially have difficulty retaining accurate accounts of distressing events. We're not saying anything false. We're simply protecting your father by treating him with appropriate caution." Catherine heard what he was saying underneath the words. She heard the offer being made, a chance to go along with a narrative that would make her life easier, that would eliminate uncertainty, that would transform her father's vulnerability into a legal advantage. She should have said no. Instead, she called the police. Detective Maria Santos received the call at 7:15 p.m. on Friday evening. It wasn't an official report yet, just a heads-up from a lawyer about a situation that might require investigation. Maria had been with the police department for 17 years and had learned to recognize the difference between actual crimes and people with lawyers trying to create legal leverage. This sounded like the latter, but the case against her was that protocol demanded she at least look into it. A report of assault, however vague, had to be documented, had to be investigated, had to become a thing. Maria had also learned, through 17 years of experience, that the internet didn't care about protocol. It cared about narrative, and a narrative was already being written. She pulled the video from the Facebook group. 2 seconds in, she knew something was wrong with the story everyone was telling. The woman in the video, young, scared, entirely focused on the old man's safety, wasn't attacking anyone. But she also knew that her knowing that wouldn't matter. What would matter is what she could prove, what she could document, what would hold up in court if this somehow became a court situation. Maria made a note to locate the woman in the video. Routine questioning. That's all this was supposed to be. But turning off her phone didn't turn off the internet. It didn't turn off the fact that someone on Reddit had recognized the hospital logo visible in the background of the video and cross-referenced it with public employee records. It didn't turn off the fact that the hospital's website had staff photos. It didn't turn off the fact that there was, apparently, only one black female nursing assistant who worked at Mercy General who matched the description. By 8:00 a.m., her name was public. Simone Williams, 26 years old, from the South Side. Nursing assistant at Mercy General, a face that had been screenshotted, enlarged, analyzed, and weaponized. By 8:30 a.m., her address was circulating on certain forums. By 9:00 a.m., the first threat was posted. "I know where you live." Simone's mother called at 9:15 a.m., Gloria's voice tight with panic. "Baby, you need to go to the police. You need to tell them what happened. You need to do it before this gets worse." "How is it going to get worse?" Simone asked, though she knew the answer. "Because the internet doesn't stop," Gloria said. "Because people have decided what you are and facts don't matter anymore. You need a lawyer, you need protection." Simone's hands were shaking. Her apartment suddenly felt small and exposed, even though she lived on the 4th floor. She imagined strangers standing outside her building, waiting. She imagined the worst-case scenarios that the internet had whispered into being. "I'll go talk to the police," she said. The police station was a 15-minute walk from her apartment. Or it should have been. But Simone found herself taking circuitous routes, avoiding the main streets, feeling paranoid in a way that was entirely justified by the circumstances. Detective Maria Santos was waiting for her in an interview room. She was a woman in her late 40s, with dark hair and tired eyes that had seen a lot of human behavior and had learned not to judge too quickly. "I'm here about the video," Simone said, "about what happened at the plaza." Maria gestured for her to sit. She slid a cup of coffee across the table, which Simone appreciated, even though she didn't drink it. "Walk me through what happened," Maria said. Simone told her everything. The rain, the time pressure, the sound of the fall, the fear in the old man's eyes. The 10 minutes she spent with him, making sure he was okay. The way he had squeezed her hand and called her good. Maria wrote notes, nodded, asked clarifying questions. She asked about Simone's intentions, her job, her background. It was a professional interview, and Maria conducted it with the assumption that Simone was telling the truth. "The man's name is Richard Sutton," Maria said. "He's 83, lives about 6 blocks from the plaza, has a heart condition, takes a daily walk for his health. Does this align with what he told you?" "Yes," Simone said. "He mentioned his cardiologist. He mentioned his daughter didn't like him going alone." "His daughter has hired a lawyer," Maria said carefully. "The lawyer is suggesting that the circumstances surrounding the fall are unclear, that there might have been some kind of altercation beforehand, that your intentions might not have been entirely protective." Simone felt something break inside her chest. "That's not true," she said. "That's completely not true. I saved his life. He's not being unclear because of trauma. He's being unclear because someone put a lawyer between him and his own conscience." Maria didn't respond right away. She looked at her notebook, at the words she'd written, at the case file that would now exist somewhere in the system. "I believe you," Maria said finally. "But I want to be clear about what that means. It means I believe your account of events. It doesn't mean the investigation ends here, because now there are claims being made by the other family involved. Now there's a narrative competing with your narrative. Now this becomes complicated." "Why?" Simone's voice rose. "Why does it become complicated when I did something good? Why doesn't the truth matter?" "The truth matters," Maria said quietly. "But the truth is slow, and the internet is fast, and the internet has already decided what it believes about you." By noon, a local news outlet had tracked down Richard Sutton's address and shown up at his door with cameras and questions. Richard, confused and alarmed, had refused to comment. But his daughter, Catherine, had agreed to talk to them, and she had done so with carefully crafted language that her lawyer had provided. "My father is an elderly man who experienced a trauma," Catherine said to the camera, her face arranged in an expression of concerned dignity. "We're not making accusations, but we are asking for a full investigation. We're asking why a hospital employee felt she had the right to put her hands on a stranger without consent. We're asking what her true intentions were." The newscast aired at 5:00 p.m. that evening. The headline was careful. "Hospital worker QSTIONED in plaza incident, family SEKS answers." But the implication was clear. The hospital worker was guilty of something. The family was the victim. The narrative was complete. Simone's phone started ringing again. This time, when she looked at her voicemails, she heard threats. She heard slurs. She heard the sound of the internet's judgment being delivered directly into her ear. "You attacked that man. We know who you are. You're going to pay for this." She didn't recognize any of the voices, but they all sounded certain. They all sounded like they had already made their decision. Her hospital supervisor called at 6:30 p.m. with the news that Simone was being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Not suspended, not fired, not yet, but removed from the premises, removed from the patients who depended on her, removed from the job that had been the only thing she was sure she was good at. "I understand," Simone said, her voice numb. "I believe in you," Patricia said, and Simone heard something genuine in those words. But she also heard the precariousness of Patricia's position, the way that defending Simone too loudly might become a liability for the hospital. "We'll get this resolved." But Simone could feel the ground beneath her shifting. She could feel the narrative tightening like a noose. She could feel what it meant to be on the wrong side of a story that half the internet had already written. That night she lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the city. She listened to the rain, which had finally stopped. She listened to the occasional siren, to the voices of people on the street below, to the normal sounds of a normal night. And she wondered how normal had become so fragile, how one moment of kindness had become evidence of guilt, how truth had become optional. She thought about Richard Sutton, about whether he was watching the news right now, whether he was allowing himself to be convinced that she had been dangerous, whether the weight of his daughter's doubt and his lawyer's guidance was erasing his own memory of what had actually happened. She thought about what Catherine had said, "We're not making accusations." But they were. They were making accusations without making accusations, destroying Simon's life while maintaining the veneer of reasonable concern. The worst part was that Simone could do nothing about it. She could not force truth to matter more than narrative. She could not compel Richard Sutton to stand up and tell his own story. She could not stop the internet from deciding what she was. All she could do was wait. All she could do was watch as everything she had built, her job, her reputation, her sense of safety in the world, was systematically dismantled by people who had no interest in facts. 3 days during which Simone's social media was flooded with messages from strangers. 3 days during which news outlets continued to report on the developing situation. 3 days during which search results for her name yielded increasingly elaborate theories about what she had actually been trying to do to Richard Sutton. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Richard Sutton's granddaughter, Maya, was a 28-year-old graduate student at the university. She was visiting her grandfather and had seen him watching the news coverage with the volume turned high, his hands shaking, his face pale. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" she asked, and Richard broke down. He told her the truth, the whole truth, without the filters that his daughter and his lawyer had placed over it. He told her about the woman who had saved him, about the fear in her face when she thought he was about to hit the ground, about the professional gentleness with which she'd helped him stand. "But the news said," Maya began. "The news is lying," Richard said. "Or not lying exactly, but not telling the truth either. There's a difference." Maya, who was young enough to understand the internet and angry enough to care about injustice, did something her grandfather would never have asked her to do. She made a video. In the video, Richard sat in front of his window, the light catching his thin white hair, making him look even more fragile and elderly than he probably was. He looked directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. "My name is Richard Sutton," he said. "I'm the man in that video from the plaza. I want to tell you what actually happened." He spoke for 4 minutes without stopping. He described the fall, the fear, the miracle of the young woman's quick reflexes. He described her professionalism, her concern, her humanity. He described the moment she had checked on him, made sure he was actually all right before she left. "I don't know this young woman's name," Richard continued, "but I know she's a good person. I know that because I watched her save my life. And then I watched my family's lawyer convince us that she was dangerous. I watched my daughter convince me that my own memory was wrong. And I allowed it because I was confused and frightened, and it was easier to go along than to stand up for what I knew was true." His voice cracked. "This young woman is suffering right now because of what I allowed to happen, because I was weak, because I didn't defend her when I should have. I want to apologize to her publicly, and I want to ask everyone watching this to question the narrative you've been given. The truth is simple. She saved my life. That's all that happened. That's the only story that matters." He said her name at the end, Simone Williams, and he looked directly at the camera as he did, as if trying to send the words directly through the screen to find her. Maya uploaded the video to YouTube at 11:47 p.m. on Wednesday night. It went viral in a way that was different from the previous narrative. Where the first video had spread through fear and outrage, this one spread through shame and recognition. People who had been following the story started to feel the weight of their judgment. People who had made threats against Simone started to realize what they had done. The narrative began to reverse, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. By Thursday morning, the video had 2 million views. News outlets that had reported on Simone's alleged assault now had to report on Richard Sutton's public statement refuting those claims. But the new reporting felt hollow, secondary. It felt like an afterthought to a story that had already been told. Simone found out when her mother called her, crying. "Baby, he told the truth. That old man told the truth. Watch this, just watch." Simone watched the video 3 times. She watched an elderly man she had spent 10 minutes with stand up and risk his daughter's anger, risk his lawyer's strategy, risk everything to defend her character. She watched him apologize for allowing himself to be guided away from what he knew was true. And she cried. By Friday, the hospital had issued a statement. "Simone Williams is a valued member of our nursing team. We are pleased that the true circumstances surrounding the Plaza incident have come to light. We look forward to her return to work." By Saturday, her administrative leave had been lifted. By Sunday, the local news was running features about the dangers of rushing to judgment in the age of social media. They interviewed media ethics experts. They discussed confirmation bias. They talked about the way narratives can harden into truths even when evidence contradicts them. None of these conversations helped Simone, because while the narrative had reversed, the damage remained. Simone's apartment still had strangers standing outside, now apologizing instead of threatening, but standing there nonetheless. The threats she had received were still in her inbox. The fear she had felt was still in her body. The people who had decided she was guilty would always have that moment of certainty encoded in their minds, and no amount of correction could fully erase it. On Monday morning, Simone returned to work. She walked through the halls of Mercy General in her scrubs, and people looked at her differently. Some with shame, some with pity, some with a morbid curiosity about what it felt like to be wronged so thoroughly and publicly. She tried to ignore all of it, but the damage to her sense of safety was permanent. She had learned in the span of 3 days that kindness was not enough, that doing the right thing could still destroy you, that the internet had the power to rewrite your character, your intentions, your entire identity. She had also learned something else, that power was fragile, that a single voice speaking truth when it came from someone people had already decided to trust could shift everything, that her salvation had come not from her own voice, but from the voice of the man she had saved, which meant her salvation depended on his willingness to defend her. Simone showed up at Richard Sutton's apartment the following Sunday with homemade soup and a box of expensive chocolates. She didn't call first. She didn't ask if it was a good time. She simply appeared at his door, dressed in civilian clothes instead of scrubs, her face exposed to whatever judgment or gratitude might be waiting there. Richard opened the door and recognized her immediately. His eyes filled with tears. "Come in," he said. "Come in, please." His apartment was exactly what Simone would have expected. Books lining every wall. A piano that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Photographs of a long life, a wedding, children, grandchildren, a woman who was probably his late wife. "I wanted to thank you in person," Richard said as he made tea. His hands shook slightly as he worked, and Simone wanted to reach out and help but held back, giving him the dignity of his own autonomy. "For that video." "You did that for me," Richard said. "Your granddaughter did. You stood up when you could have stayed silent." "I should have stood up earlier," Richard said heavily. "I should have stood up the moment my daughter's lawyer started talking. I should have trusted my own memory instead of doubting it because a professional told me to." They sat together in his living room, and Richard told Simone about the fight with his daughter. Catherine had been furious when she found out about the video. She had accused him of making the family look bad, of throwing away a potential lawsuit, of betraying her attempt to protect him. "She's not speaking to me," Richard said. "She called my lawyer and fired him. She told me I was naive and foolish. She said I'd been manipulated by the media." "I'm sorry," Simone said. "Don't be," Richard said. "She needed to learn this lesson. We all did. I needed to learn that my own judgment matters more than someone else's strategy. She needed to learn that protection based on injustice isn't protection at all." They talked for 3 hours. Richard told Simone about his life, his career as a music teacher, his wife who had died 5 years ago, his regret that his daughter had inherited his wife's anxiety instead of his wife's courage. "She was always like this," Richard said. "Even as a child, always worried about threats, about reputation, about what people would think. My wife used to say it was because Catherine was afraid of being left behind, that her fear of judgment was really just fear of abandonment." "Maybe," Simone said, "but that doesn't make what she did okay." "No," Richard agreed. "It doesn't, but it helps to understand it. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving, but it means not being destroyed by the anger." When Simone left, Richard pressed money into her hand. "For your trouble," he said, "for the wages you lost." Simone tried to refuse, but Richard was insistent. "Let me do this," he said. "Let me do one thing right." Over the next 2 weeks, Simone and Richard fell into an easy friendship. She would visit on her days off. They would drink tea and talk. Richard introduced her to his classical music collection. Simone told him about nursing school and her dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner. "You should apply again," Richard said. "You're exactly the kind of nurse the world needs, kind, decisive, able to act in the moment." "Nursing schools don't know about the plaza," Simone said. "But anyone could find the story online. They could find the old narrative and think I'm dangerous. Then you'll address it, Richard said simply. You'll tell them the truth, and the schools that matter will believe you. There was a confidence in his voice, a faith in human goodness that Simone was still in the process of rebuilding. But she found herself wanting to believe it because Richard believed it. She applied to nursing schools again. This time, she included a statement in her application, brief and factual, explaining the Plaza incident and its resolution. She didn't ask for pity. She simply told the truth and let the schools decide what to do with it. Meanwhile, Catherine Sutton was experiencing her own reckoning. The story had become a media sensation in a new way. It was now a story about the dangers of jumping to conclusions, about the way privilege and fear could combine to destroy an innocent person, about the way narratives could be weaponized. Catherine had become a villain in her own family story. Her other children stopped calling as frequently. She saw the way people looked at her when her name came up in the local news. A woman in her yoga class mentioned, loudly enough for Catherine to hear, that she had heard Catherine had tried to destroy an innocent girl's life. Catherine's life had not been destroyed, but it had been diminished in ways that mattered. She had lost her father's trust. She had lost her self-respect. She had become the thing she had always been afraid of being, someone who was judged and found wanting. 3 weeks after Richard's video, Catherine called her father. I want to apologize, she said without preamble. To you, to Simone, to everyone, I was wrong. I was afraid, and I let my fear turn into something ugly. Richard accepted her apology. He didn't forgive her immediately. Forgiveness was something that would have to be earned over time. But he didn't reject her either. He invited her to dinner. Simone was there when Catherine arrived. It was awkward and tense, and the conversation was careful and measured. But they sat together and they ate, and they talked about what had happened and what it meant. Catherine didn't ask for Simone's forgiveness. I don't deserve it, Catherine said quietly. I was trying to protect my father by destroying your reputation. That's not protection. That's just cruelty with a good excuse. I'm not angry anymore, Simone said, and she realized it was true. Anger had given way to something more complex, a sorrow for what Catherine had allowed fear to turn her into. I just want to move forward. 8 months later, Simone received her acceptance letter from the University of Chicago's nursing program. She would be starting in the fall. She would be a nurse in 3 years. She called Richard first. I told you, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I told you that schools that matter would believe you. Simone attended her graduation party the following month, not for nursing school, but for completing her prerequisites with her community college. Richard came, and so did Maya, his granddaughter. Catherine came too, awkwardly, still working through the process of rebuilding trust with her father. But there were other people there too, nurses who had worked with Simone, who had stood by her during the difficult days. Gloria, her mother, who had never doubted her daughter's character, and a few media outlets which Simone had allowed to cover the story, not the original viral story, but the full arc. The kindness, the accusation, the humiliation, the vindication, and the hard work of moving forward. The local news ran a feature. From Scandal to Scholar, the SIMONEWILLIAMS story. Simone hated the title. It was too neat, too much of a narrative arc, too eager to turn her suffering into an inspirational story. But she allowed it because she knew that stories mattered. She knew that if people saw her story as one of redemption instead of destruction, they might think twice before destroying the next innocent person. She knew it probably wouldn't help, but she let them tell it anyway. Richard died 14 months after Simone started nursing school. He had a heart attack in the plaza where they had met. The irony was not lost on anyone. Simone was at his bedside when he passed. She held his hand, just as he had held hers that first morning when she had helped him up. She whispered that she would remember him, that she would be the kind of nurse he had believed she could be, that his faith in her had mattered. In his will, Richard left half of his modest estate to Simone. The other half went to Catherine with a note. For my daughter, with hope that she will learn what my granddaughter and Simone have already taught me, that true protection comes from standing for what is right, not from protecting ourselves at the cost of others' suffering. Catherine read those words and wept. And then she did something that mattered. She used her inheritance to start a nonprofit dedicated to helping people who had been falsely accused through social media. She left her pharmaceutical job. She became, in her own way, a form of redemption for the harm she had caused. Simone graduated from nursing school 3 years and 7 months after the Plaza incident. She was hired at Mercy General immediately. They wanted to hire her, wanted to redeem their earlier institutional caution by showing their support for one of their own. She worked in the cardiac unit, the same unit where Richard had spent his final months. She worked with elderly patients, with people who were afraid and vulnerable. She was patient with them, not because she was trained to be, but because she had learned what it meant to be vulnerable herself. She was kind, not the naive kind of kindness that had gotten her into trouble, but the kind of kindness that was aware of the world's capacity for cruelty, that knew the cost of goodness, and that chose kindness anyway. Years later, when she was a nurse practitioner, she would tell new nurses about the Plaza. She would tell them that kindness had its costs, but that the alternative, a world where people were too afraid to help, was worse. You'll do the right thing, she would tell them, and the wrong people will call you a villain. You'll save a life and the internet will try to destroy you. You'll be good and good won't be enough. The world is broken that way. So what do we do? The younger nurses would ask. We be good anyway, Simone would say. Not because the world will reward us, not because people will understand, but because the alternative is to let the world win, and I'm not letting the world win.